Politics is more polarizing than ever. Why is it that everyone that is not far left is now far right? Is the GOP establishment being overtaken by MAGA? All this and more. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Create Your Own Life Show. I am your host, Jeremy Ryan Slate, the CEO of Command Your Brand, and we help to combat cancel culture by placing our clients on the right podcasts. You can grab our new book, which is just ranked #1 in the PR space over at bestpodcastbook.com. Reminder before we get into today's conversation to comment on and like this video and smash that subscribe button if you support liberty, freedom, and want to build a better future. Our episode today is someone I like to call the King of New York from the New York Young Republicans Club. Welcome to the show, Gavin Wax.
Thank you for having me on. It's great to be here.
So, Gavin, for people that may not be familiar with you and what you do, man, and if they don't follow you on X, they definitely should. Tell us who you are, man.
Absolutely. My name's Gavin Wax. As you said, I'm the president of the New York Young Republican Club. We're the oldest and largest Republican club in the country, fighting the good fight deep behind enemy lines here in New York City. I'm a columnist. I have, I do a lot of writing for Newsmax, Town Hall, the Daily Caller. I've recently published my first book, The Emerging Populist Majority. I guess I'm a political activist, commentator, all that, and happy to talk with you today.
So I guess let's start with that too, because I think populism is kind of an interesting idea. Like, I feel like for those of us that, would call ourselves populists in a lot of ways, we see it as a good thing, but you see kind of the mainstream media has really come in hard against that idea. So I guess, how would you classify the current populist movement we're seeing, not just nationally, but globally?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, populism has existed throughout history. It's always been the movement that runs against elitism and especially nowadays globalism. And it emerges when there's a need. Obviously, when times are good, when things are good, you don't need populism. The 1950s, 1960s, we didn't really need populism in the United States because, society was running for the most part pretty well economically, socially, culturally, and otherwise. But when the elites start to get very disconnected from the people, from the populace, and they start to, kind of go a little wild, go a little off the rails, that's when you see populism emerge. And obviously, it can come in many different shapes and varieties, depending on the country, depending on the local dynamics, the history, the culture, the region. Obviously, the populism of Trump is very different from the populism of Javier Milei in Argentina. You're talking about two different societies, two different countries, two different set of political and economic circumstances. But ultimately, it all shares a common thread, and that thread being, fighting against the status quo, fighting against this elitism. And, I prefer to use the term populist nowadays as instead of conservative, which I used to use, because really there's nothing left to conserve, and maybe that's a little bit in the weeds. Maybe that's a little bit too—
I don't think it's in the weeds, though. I think that's a really important point because like for myself, Gavin, I'm not that far from you. I'm in Northwest New Jersey, where it's kind of a little bit more farm country over here. But I grew up as a Rush Limbaugh kid, and as I've gotten older and everything else, I found that Republican Party that I thought represented me doesn't really care about me anymore. And I think that's kind of the rough situation a lot of us that are leaning more towards populism feel.
Absolutely. Look, I think the Republican Party establishment has been completely derelict in its duties, not only to win elections, but to really represent and reward its constituents and its own people. I was talking about this earlier today, hate the Democrats all you want, but they understand the name of the game, politics. They reward their friends and they punish their enemies. I'd love to see a Republican Party that did that, especially if they want my vote, my loyalty, and my dollar. And look, I think Trump gets that. I think this Trump brand of populism, it's a bellicose form of politics. It's fighting. It's rising to the occasion. It understands that this is not the time for going along to get along, for pats on the head from the corporate media, or from nodding approvals from Democrats. This is a time for people to roll up their sleeves and really get into the arena and Teddy Roosevelt style and actually get dirty and win battles politically and get some actual wins for the people that they represent. I think that's what people are looking for from Republican elected officials and candidates. And for far too long, we've had a Republican Party that was anything but that. And they've basically sold our country short. I used to say to the highest bidder, but I want to say, and this is the Uni Party, by the way, not just the Republicans, but both wings of the same bird. They've sold our country to the lowest bidder in many respects, which is almost more insulting. But this populist movement, it's ascended, it's on the rise, it's dominating, and this is at the same time, this is not going to happen overnight. I think a lot of people, and we'll obviously get into this more, but
Sure.
it's an ascendant movement. It's moving in the right direction. It's growing, but that doesn't mean that we're going to have every victory, tomorrow. This is a long
Mhm.
fight. There's a long time horizon. There's election cycles ahead, and that's kind of the mentality you have to have when you approach politics. The left approaches it with a very long term vision, generational view. They're not looking at it just one election cycle. They're looking at it, what are they going to do in 50, 60, 70, 80 years when they're all dead? And that's really how you play politics at a macro level. You look at the generational trends, and populism. If we play our cards right, we'll be the dominant political force in this country, I think, for the next generation.
Well, and it's when they're all dead, they'll still be voting too. But I guess that's
That's
how it
true.
works. And I think it's the thing that's been interesting too. And I'm curious to see from your perspective if this has changed a bit. Raheem Kassam about a year ago made a statement on the show that when people were talking about the Ron DeSanctimonious talk, it's if you don't have the stomach for it, then get your chamomile tea and get a blanket and go go sit by a fire or something. And I think that's been a real issue with the establishment Republican Party is they're not willing to be a brawler in some ways. And I think that's why Donald Trump has done what he's done because he's a brawler. I guess have you seen that political climate start to change now as we're kind of further into the campaign?
Yes, I think, in this day and age, I say this a lot, way back when you needed to have a voice for radio, then you need to have a face for television, but now you have to have the authenticity for social media. And with authenticity, it goes hand in hand with passion. And I think, people want to see fighters. They want to see people that are passionate. They're willing to punch back. That just goes to show that you're committed. They don't want these stale, consultant approved, sloganeering candidates. And in many ways, you mentioned Ron DeSanctimonious. That's really what his campaign boiled down to, is this very stale, consultant driven mode of politics that, was from yesteryear. It's decades old. It doesn't work anymore. People want to see that rawness, that authenticity. That's why, when President Trump used to tweet, people loved it, because you actually get to see what he's thinking, what he's feeling. You actually get the sense of who the guy is himself. There's an authenticity there, whether you like what he happens to be typing or saying or not. And I think a lot of Republicans need to get that. I think the problem is a lot of these Republicans, they move up through this feeder system of local politics where, they move to the next position by kissing enough ass and,
Mhm.
being as sycophantic as possible, and they get rewarded. So as a result, we have a real feeder system and bench of Republicans who really are not qualified or up to the standards to really win, not only win elections but also compete and maneuver in this new political landscape, even if they were in government. So
Mhm.
I think there's a lot of changes that need to happen across the board in terms of Republicans and how they engage with rhetoric and policy, and how they present themselves. But if we really lean into it, or we really lean into the Trump populist movement, I think we're going to see massive electoral windfalls and wins up and down the ballot, and we can start to really form some governing majorities at the local, state, and hopefully federal level.
And I guess looking at it, when we look at kind of the modern day GOP or modern day Republican Party, do you see it more as MAGA being like an ascendant force to kind of become the party? Do you see the party in some ways splitting up, or how do you see that going? Because it does seem like there is a little bit of a, I don't want to use the term civil war, but there is kind of a bit of a some battle lines being drawn between the populist right and kind of the standard GOP right.
Absolutely. Well, look, I think we're definitely in a transition period, and I think that explains a lot of what we're seeing. There's certainly a lot of factional disputes and internal fighting, and I think civil war is apt here. I mean, you just look at the speakership fight. You can see, this is not a polite political disagreement. We're really engaged in some really intense internal political struggle, and this is going to go on for a while. I mean, it takes a while. There's a lot of ingrained and entrenched establishment, individuals in the party apparatus, the party infrastructure, and it's going to take a while for them to give up their positions, to be removed from office. This doesn't happen overnight. It's a slow kind of slugfest, if you will. But I think
Hmm.
ultimately it's heading in one direction and one direction only, and that's with MAGA, America First, and the populists in charge of the party effectively for the most part. Obviously, there'll be exceptions here and there on the fringes, but that's the direction we're heading in. And I think, obviously, when you have power, when you're in a position of power, and when you're the incumbent or you represent the status quo, you're going to fight like hell to maintain that position. And I think that's what we're seeing from the establishment. That's what we're seeing from people like Nikki Haley. She kind of embodies that. You're seeing, sort of the last dying breaths of this establishment clinging to power to the bitter end, fighting tooth and nail for it. And, that's to be expected, but we have to fight just as hard to wrest power away from them and put our people in positions where we can actually dictate policy and dictate the direction of the party. Because I think only then are we really going to start to see the fruits of our labor and real wins under our belt. And we've basically been fighting a two-front war for the last few years. We're fighting, obviously, against the institutional and radical left, and we're fighting, the institutional Republicans, the establishmentarians, the kind of the swamp creatures. And it's happening not just in the party; it's happening in the think tank sphere. It's happening in all these ancillary organizations and the conservative media apparatus, whatever it is, podcasts. I mean, it's happening all over.
Well, it's interesting too, because I think if you look at it, to me, the thing I'm really hopeful about, Gavin, is if you look at, I guess, the conservative or movement now, the Matt Gaetz of the world, the people like, yourself and Jack Posobiec and people that are, more of our generation in a lot of ways, you can actually see the difference between left and right now when you look at, I guess the modern or new right. But when you look at, kind of Nikki Haley's right, or, even George W. Bush's right, there's not that much of a difference between them. And Robin Williams had this joke back in the day. George Bush liked to say he was a compassionate conservative. It kind of sounds like a Volvo with a gun rack. And I think that now you can actually see the distinct difference if you look at kind of the modern right versus the old right. Have you thought of it that way?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the political dichotomies in this country are becoming more and more stark by the day. You see that, between the Republicans and the Democrats. You talked about George Bush, go back to the Bush years or the early 2000s and the 90s. I mean, the differences between the political parties were very, very minimal. I mean, you were really talking on the fringes. It really wasn't a stark difference between, say, a Bush or even a Gore. I mean, we look back on those races now and we think they were massive differences. They were all for the same things. They were all for free trade. They were all for globalism. They were all for these forever wars. They were all for, all the same policies. I mean, there was very subtle differences between them, so in many ways, it's actually a positive now that we're starting to see some real differences between the parties. You actually get more of a choice, I guess, is the silver lining. But then that also goes within the Republican Party itself. You're starting to see these stark differences between the factions, between these figureheads, between these leaders and these political these political figures. We're seeing stark differences and contrasts, not just in their policy, but in their style and their rhetoric, which I would argue is almost as important, really, in this day and age for politics, whether we want to admit it or not. So that's only going to continue. I think that political, that dichotomy is only going to get wider. I think there's going to be, bigger and starker gaps in society. We're becoming very divided along political fault lines, and I think that's only going to, continue to get more intense as the years go on, especially as, the economy and society as a whole continues to stagnate and the society becomes more politicized. I don't think a very politicized society is necessarily a healthy society. This is kind of part of the cyclical nature of civilization. We're becoming extremely politicized, politicized, and we're seeing these divides because there is no national consensus. There is no unifying forces really anymore that are really keeping the country together. And, it's a sad state of affairs, but we got here because of the sort of the dereliction of the elites and their dereliction of duties and really guiding this country on the right path. And because of that, we are in the place we are in today, and it calls for a reaction. It calls for a new political order. It calls for a change of leadership, and hopefully we get there, and hopefully we can bring about an American national renewal and turn things around.
If you appreciate the work that we do here and you want to support this show, the biggest way you can do that is by supporting the products that we know, use, and love, and that I recommend for you here on the show. The first that I want to talk about is My Pillow, literally one of my favorite products. The My Pillow Classic is what I use every single night. It's handled a lot of my neck pain, a lot of my back pain. As you guys know, I've been a competitive powerlifter since my early 20s. I've retired from that, but I still take pretty good care of myself, and I'm still pulling some heavy weights as I pulled 500 last week on a deadlift. And our favorite product from when we travel is actually the My Pillow travel pillow, and it's one of the things that we actually give to absolutely everybody. It is a great product to fall asleep on. So if you want to go to mypillow.com/CYOL, there's some really great holiday deals over there. You can get up to 66% off of select products. Also, one of the biggest changes in my life over the years has been handling a lot of the parasites in my body. A number of years ago, I did a cleanse with Dr. Jason Dean, and we removed these things called liver fluke from my body. They were actually eating my liver. It was kind of crazy. And every few months, I do either a parasite cleanse or his full moon detox that he's doing right now. So if you want to head over to bravetv.store/CYOL and grab some of his amazing products over there. I know he has a great holiday special going on right now as well. Support our sponsors. They help this show to continue, and they help us to do what we're doing. And we could not do it without you. And you could do it just by using the power of the purse and supporting the products that we love. Thanks. You mentioned the thing that you would say is I guess more important is the difference in their rhetoric. How would you describe that difference? I'm sure our listeners are curious.
Well, listen, I think, again, it kind of goes to what I was mentioning earlier. I think President Trump, he sort of speaks from the gut. He speaks from the heart. He's not nearly as polished as some of these other contenders, but I think people appreciate that in this day and age. I think people have had decades to listen to sort of the really, the really performative and really well rehearsed kind of rhetoric from the political elites. They all sort of sound the same, and they say a lot without saying much of anything at the same time. And I think it's kind of that corporate speak where you're talking about synergies, and I guess in the political example, the American dream, or the shining city on the hill, all these sort of cliches. I think people are sick of it. They see through it. It's phony, and that phoniness, maybe 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago, it didn't really show through as much through the media of the day. But I think nowadays, with all the media we have, all this sort of real time, media and social media, whatever it is, you really start to see through people. You start to see, how authentic they are, how phony they are. And people like Nikki Haley are never going to be able to compete in that environment because she comes across as inherently phony. Ron DeSantis, with his consultants leading the way, he came across as increasingly, unlikable, phony, and robotic. And, sometimes, you don't even need to have the perfect list of policy wonk prescriptions if you're able to message and speak to people in a way that they relate to, in a way that they can understand, in a way that they get a sense of who you are. All of a sudden, you're opening massive doors for yourself, politically speaking, and you're really winning over voters you wouldn't have won over before. And I think, being able to engage in that kind of politics really, goes to striking it into the culture and understanding the culture, understanding the political, the cultural dynamics at play, and how to kind of lean into that to your advantage. And obviously we're in an uphill battle against the left. They dominate the cultural making institutions of this country. So having people that really have a sense and a pulse on the country's direction, and being able to speak to it in an authentic, clear way, whether it's punching back hard
Sure.
against the media or the left, and not being afraid to, kind of come across as a little maybe rough around the edges. I think that's kind of what's called for right now, and I think that's what people are looking for.
I've found every DeSantis speech difficult to listen to because Gavin, it always sounded like he was reading. Even when he wasn't reading, it always sounded like the man was reading. I'm like,
Yep.
Anyway, but I guess looking at that, then I think it was about a few weeks ago, we had the head of the Arizona GOP on tape, supposedly bribing Kari Lake, and I guess looking at that, how do you react to a situation like that? And I think, what do you think that says about, I guess, the Republican leadership and if Ronna McDaniel is needed anymore or anything like that? Like, how do you react to that?
Well, I think it was a great revealing moment because I think a lot of people have to get over the hump that these politicians or party officials or whoever else are not extremely corrupt. I think, that's just sort of, one example. Maybe it's a minor example. I think it's happening at a far greater scale behind the scenes, far more sophisticated than what that GOP chairman got caught with. But, I think a lot of our politicians, our elected officials, our party officials are really bought and paid for. I think there's a lot of compromise. I think there's a lot of dirt. I think there's a lot of bribes, either directly or indirectly being paid. And I think, that's kind of the institutional corruption we see, not just in politics, but across the board. You see it in the medical establishment. You see it in the educational establishment. You see it in corporate America. Our whole country is really on a decline. We're no longer a high trust cohesive society, and as a result you're seeing some of this third worldism really creep in. You import the third
Mm.
world, you become the third world, even if the people doing the bribes are not from the third world. It just really starts to infect the culture, and we're going to start to see a lot more of these types of old school pay to play schemes and bribes and political chicanery if continue to happen. And I think if the more Americans become aware of it and realize it's commonplace, I think it's a bit cynical, but I think it's helpful. I think it's beneficial. I think the United States for a long time, we've had a culture where you've had a sort of a civic religion where everyone sort of was very confident in the systems, in the institution that, we have our Constitution, we have our Bill of Rights, everyone is, on the up and up, everyone is clean cut and, doing the right thing from the FBI to the local department of whatever. But I think nowadays people are kind of taking on the sort of cynicism as it comes to government and politics and realizing, the grift is real, the corruption is real, the game is very dirty, and I think that's a good thing because I think it's a wake up call, and I think finally recognizing and realizing. One of the problems is the first step to being able to address it, but you're never going to be able to fix these things if they're kind of buried under the rug or not common knowledge. And look, I think this happens a lot. I think this situation with Carrie Lake is just one example of it, but I'm glad it's been exposed, and I think it just goes to show that there's a lot of dark money that moves around, and there's a lot of dirty games that are played behind the scenes, and that's just the name of the game right now. So we need to have people that are willing to engage with that, fight it, call it out, and operate within a system that is really going to reward people that play dirty and punish people that try to play the right, play the high road.
Do you think we'll start to see, I guess, more exposure like that of the money and the corruption behind things too? Because I know it's not Republican establishment, but even with the E. Jean Carroll case, we had,
Yep.
Reid Hoffman, who's one of the number one donors to Nikki Haley. I think at this point he's pulled a lot of money back. Was also one of the main funders of the E. Jean Hoffman case. So you look at that, or E. Jean Carroll case, sorry. And so you look at that, and we're starting to get more of an idea of what the money is behind things. Do you think we'll start to see a pattern of more of these things getting exposed so that people can make real decisions on things?
Oh, absolutely. Look, I think, they had to pull the curtain back because it's become so egregious. There's been so much of this happening. It's so over the top. I mean, even look at Watergate. It was so nothing compared to what's happening today. And that was such a big deal back in the day because it was so unheard of. And listen, I'm a big Nixon fan, but I think it's a good example to show just how far we've fallen that, that was considered such a great scandal. And nowadays it's like you get 70 Watergates every day, and they're actually real. And I think because of that, I think their only plan forward is just to normalize it. I think it's if you overwhelm people with the evidence of corruption, with the criminality, people become sort of, immune to it. They sort of become, accustomed to it. It's just not as revolting as it may have once been. I think it's a good tactic. It's a good strategy if you're really trying to ram through societal change into a much more corrupt and criminal society. You just have to make it so overwhelming that people just become, completely unfazed by it. And it just
Mhm.
becomes part of the course and it becomes sort of accepted. And once you hit that stage of acceptance, that's kind of a bad point. And that's really when things get really rough. And I think we're kind of at that stage right now. I think people have just kind of become accustomed and accepted this sort of, commonplace, corruption. And, it's only going to get worse from here. And, that just goes to show society is very cyclical in a way. And, we're going to have to if we understand what stage we're at. And I think we're at a stage where there's just mass acceptance of these sorts of things. We can have a better understanding of how to tackle it going forward. So again, I'm trying to find the silver linings, but I definitely think to answer your question, it's been largely normalized and just
Mm.
sort of, people just shrug.
Well, Gavin, I'm going to use the word now that's going to make it so we can't run advertising on the YouTube video, this version of this video, and that word is election.
Yeah.
Any video we mention the word election on, they decline us for advertising. But anyway, I guess like looking at that as we head into 2020, the 2024 election season now, do you think Biden's sticking around? Like, what does this look like? Because I just don't see him being the candidate. And what do you think the Democrat plan is for Trump? Is it for them to put him in jail? Like, where does it go from here? Like, what are we looking at with the two candidates?
Well, I think when it comes to Biden, believe it or not, I think he's their strongest candidate. They really don't have a deep bench, and I think anyone else they would try to bring in to replace him, maybe with the exception of maybe Gretchen Whitmer or somebody, would probably be a net detriment to their electoral chances. Biden still has some appeal to some potential voters who kind of view him in a dated way as this old school moderate Dem, which he isn't. I mean, that certainly helped him in 2020 to a much larger degree. I think that's kind of out the window for most voters now because of his, going on 4 years now of his presidency. But at the same time, he's certainly miles away better in terms of the polling, in terms of his political favorabilities, than someone like a Kamala Harris or some of the other names that have been thrown around. And I think, I don't know all the specific minutia or mechanisms of the Democrat Party process, but my understanding is by this point in time, he's kind of basically stuck there unless he were to resign or die in office, and then in which case it would default to Kamala Harris for the most part. And I think if they try to do anything crazy last minute, the time is running out, and I think they just
Hmm.
don't. There's so many unknowns, and there's so many
Sure.
potential variables that they really don't know if it's going to be beneficial or not. And they're up against a hard clock. And, as to Trump himself, I think they're probably slowly coming to the realization that the politicized prosecutions and persecutions of the president have actually backfired in many ways.
Hmm.
One, they're suffering a string of legal defeats in a lot of these cases, a lot of these criminal indictments, and he's coming across better. And even in the cases where he's not doing so well, it just sort of cements him as a martyr, and it makes him seem it's just increasing his numbers, and people are viewing this for what it is. It's that it's extremely politicized, and it's not actually a just or fair treatment of the president. So it's working in his favor, both in terms of the actual legal wins that he's scoring and also in terms of public perception. So, if they want to double down on it, I think that could theoretically still be in the cards, but I don't think it's going to help them. I think at this point, most of this stuff is going to be pushed off until after the election, and they're not going to be able to throw him behind bars before then. And even if they did, I don't necessarily think it would be the end of his campaign. I think it would just really continue to strengthen his position and his legacy within the American, political history. But I think, look, President Trump is not only in the strongest position of his political career in terms of polling. He never polled this well in 16 or 20. He's up on the aggregate by like 4-something points. I mean, he's looking at an electoral landslide. And this is a consistent trend line that's been shown both in the state level polling, the national polling. Any way you slice, cut, or dice it, there's been a consistent trend in all of these different polls from all these different companies and outlets that have shown him widening his lead over Biden, winning over certain demographics, winning over certain groups, winning over certain states. He's in a very strong and frankly enviable position. And it's not just for his political career. He's probably in one of the strongest positions of any Republican running for president in the last, I don't know, 2-3 decades. So, this is a great position to be in. And frankly, I don't see the situation electorally getting much better for Biden over the next few months. I mean, the world is
Hmm.
continuing to descend into further and into more chaos, more instability. The economy is not roaring ahead by any means, and he doesn't really have anything working in his favor in terms of current events or news. And I think as that goes on, and people continue to feel the brunt of this failed administration, the Biden administration, and its utter failings, I think it's only going to put Trump in a much better position. And let's remember, this is a very unique race from the outset because you basically have two incumbents. We haven't seen anything like this since Grover Cleveland in the 1880s. You have someone with their own record and their own set of accomplishments, being President Trump during his 4 years, and you're putting him against someone else who is currently serving in office and his 4 years, that of Biden. So you actually have two track records to compare, and they're very near. You don't have to remember that far back to remember how good things were say in 2018. So, with that in mind, I think it's really going to benefit him. And I think a lot of voters are probably having buyer's remorse for Biden. He's not going to have the electoral environment that he did in 2020 with COVID and all the rest. He's not going to have a color revolution. He's not going to have a global pandemic. And I think because of that, he's in a extremely perilous position politically. And I think President Trump has been running a very effective campaign, far more effective than he did in 2020. It's been nimble. It hasn't made many mistakes. It's been, hitting the right tones in terms of messaging, and effectiveness, both in terms of the primary and in terms of the general. And you mentioned this in the opening. This is why the establishment is trying to drag this primary on for as long as possible, because they're trying to throw everything
Yes.
they can at him in the kitchen sink. And this primary process is a waste of money. It's a distraction. It prevents him from pivoting to the general and focusing on states in the general that he needs to campaign in. And instead of
Well, that's what,
focusing
even
on,
if you look at like Nikki Haley, like I don't understand why she's still running. Do you get what I'm saying? Like I that's the thing I don't get, Gavin. Like,
yeah,
she's making Trump burn money. She's burning people's money herself. Like, she's not going to win anything. Like, what's
it's a
the point?
kamikaze mission. It's all a kamikaze mission. Even DeSantis was a kamikaze mission. I mean, maybe he had a bit more wherewithal to drop out because he has hopes for
Well,
2028.
I think he had a little bit more of a chance to win than her, but like she literally has no chance at this point in
She
time.
has no chance. I mean, mathematically, it's over. She's going to be embarrassed in her home state. But again, I bring up kamikaze because she's done politically. I mean, she's been out of the political world for a while in terms of elective office, and now she's about to lose her home state, which to most people would be an absolute death blow to their future political career. But I don't think she has one. I think she's going to go back to serve on the board of some, Boeing or some other military industrial, state funded corporate entity, and happily reside in her beach home in South Carolina or wherever, living the good life. So to her, she's doing what she's being told to do, what she's being paid to do, and they're making an investment not to see her necessarily win, but to waste and burn resources of President Trump, but most importantly, burn time, because he's
Hmm.
only one man. He can only be in one place at once. Obviously, he pushes that to the limit with his campaign style and his aggressive campaigning. He's flying back and forth across the country on Trump Force One, but still, if he has to waste time in these Republican primary states that are not really that don't really necessarily matter as much in the general, it's time that he could be focusing on in these purple states that could be flipped. Instead of putting a lot of effort in, say, South Carolina, he could be campaigning more in Pennsylvania or Michigan or Wisconsin, but he can't be there right now because he has this stupid primary that he has to deal with. So hopefully it comes to a crashing, a crushing end after South Carolina. But who knows? Maybe she sticks it out until the convention, and we have this, de facto primary race that just won't end until the fat lady sings.
And maybe she'll give another victory speech after a third place finish,
Yeah,
which
exactly.
that did not make any sense to me. It was kind of
Uh,
like, this is the best third place finish we've ever had, and blah blah. Well, Gavin, I appreciate your time today. I know you've had a really really tight day, and you fit us in right after another media appearance you had. So for people listening, if they want to connect with you, if they want to follow your work, how can they do that?
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. I think this was a great interview, and I'm very happy to be on. You can follow me at Gavin Wax on X, Instagram, Facebook, or every social media outlet. My website, gavinwax.com, for all my latest columns. You can get my book, The Emerging Populist Majority, on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever books are sold. And you can follow the New York Young Republican Club at NYYRC, NYYRC.com. If you happen to be in the New York metro area, which I think you technically qualify for, you should join, get involved, and come by for an event.
Absolutely, Gavin. Thank you so much for being on today, man.
Thank you.